Jason Peterson wasn't the kind of man who chased chaos. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He didn't believe in chasing dreams that couldn't pay the bills. What he wanted was simple: a house, a steady job, a partner who stood by him. Born and raised just outside Charleston, South Carolina, Jason was a product of the land and the men who worked it. His father was a welder who left the house before sunrise. His uncles were contractors, laborers, men who fixed roofs in July heat and never talked about their feelings. And Jason? He was the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who listened more than he spoke. By 18, he was already laying bricks beside men twice his age. By 25, he was saving for a plot of land. While his friends were out chasing parties and breakups, Jason was building something slower, more solid. He didn't date much, not because he wasn't interested, but because he didn't believe in wasting time. If it didn't feel real, he didn't pursue it. What he longed for, what he held on to quietly, was the kind of love his parents had built. Patient, unspoken, unshakable. A partner to come home to. A warm meal. A hand on his shoulder. Silence that didn't need to be filled. And in the summer of 2010, he met someone who made the world go quiet in just that way. Her name was Lily. It happened at a backyard barbecue, the kind with too much smoke and not enough seating. Jason had come late, intending only to say hello and leave early. But then he saw her, standing near the grill, soft eyes, quiet laugh. Hands folded in front of her like she wasn't sure she belonged. She wasn't loud or flashy. She didn't flirt. She just looked up when he said hello and held his gaze for half a second too long. That was all it took. Over the next few weeks, they saw more of each other. At first in groups, then alone. Walks downtown, late-night coffee, Sunday drives. There was something about Lily that Jason couldn't name, but trusted. She didn't pry, didn't push. She listened. She remembered things. She asked about his mother. She made silence feel like comfort, not punishment. And Jason, he started to picture a future. The kind with a porch light left on and quiet dinners that stretched into slow evenings. What he didn't know, what Lily couldn't bring herself to say, was that her love came with a secret. Not a lie, but a truth buried so deep it frightened her to give it breath. Lily had lived another life before Charleston. A different name, a different body, a different past. But she had come to this town to leave that all behind, to begin again, to be loved, not for who she used to be, but for who she had become. And Jason made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have that she could be loved without explanation. And so the foundation was laid, stone by stone, day by day. Two quiet souls, building a life together. But the thing about secrets is, they don't stay buried forever, especially not when they live under the same roof. Long before she was Lily Peterson, she was someone else entirely. Someone she rarely spoke of. Someone she buried with soft hands and a steel will. She came from a town where difference was a dirty word, where small talk could cut like razors, where every glance felt like a judgment. And for most of her early life, she carried that weight in silence, performing the role expected of her while something inside screamed quietly beneath the surface. She had known since childhood that something didn't align. Her body, her name, her place in the mirror. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a phase. It was a quiet ache for truth that only got louder as the years passed. At 22, she left it all behind. The name her parents gave her. The town that never knew her. The body that never felt like home. She scraped together money, found a counselor, started hormone therapy, walked through fire. Every step forward came with pain, emotional, financial, spiritual. But she took them anyway. Not because it was easy, but because not doing so was a kind of slow death she refused to accept. By 26, after surgery, she stepped out into the world again, reassembled. Not perfect, not fearless, but herself. She changed her name, moved to Charleston, took a quiet office job where no one asked too many questions, rented a small apartment and filled it with soft things, candles, curtains, notebooks half filled with poems she never showed anyone. Her life wasn't loud, but it was hers. And for the first time, that was enough. When she met Jason, she hadn't been looking for love. She didn't trust it. She had learned that love could turn quickly to shame when secrets came to light. She had learned the hard way that even a kind voice could become a fist when faced with a truth it didn't want to hear. So she treaded carefully. Jason didn't ask much about her past, and she was grateful. He accepted the quiet, didn't dig for more. And slowly, something unfamiliar bloomed. Safety. He treated her not like someone broken or hiding, but like someone who simply was. She told herself it was okay to hold back, that her past didn't define her, that her love for him was real, and wasn't that what mattered? But love without truth is always balancing on a blade. Every wedding plan, every new drawer of shared clothes, every whispered conversation about kids pulled at her heart with invisible threads of guilt. She thought about telling him countless times, in the car, over dinner, in bed, with his arms around her and the room full of breathless trust. But the fear was louder. What if this moment, this beautiful, rare peace, was shattered the second she said it aloud? What if she became someone else in his eyes? So she said nothing. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she couldn't bear the risk of losing the one person who made her feel like she belonged in her own skin. And so the marriage moved forward. On the outside, perfect. Inside, fragile. She loved him deeply, but a secret lived in the walls of their home, pressed between wedding photos and promises whispered in the dark. And one day, she knew. That secret would come knocking, and someone would have to answer. The attic had been waiting. That's what it felt like, looking back. It was early March, 2013. The air was beginning to thaw. The sun lingered just a little longer, and Jason, ever the dutiful husband, had promised Lily he'd finally tackle the storage mess above their bedroom. Boxes from the move, old tools, holiday decorations, and the usual forgotten clutter that collects in the cracks of a marriage. He wasn't looking for anything, just clearing space, doing what husbands do. The attic smelled of dust and wood. He moved slowly through the tight space, careful not to step between beams. A box of tangled lights here, a stack of wedding cards there, and then something unusual. A small plastic tub tucked behind a roll of insulation, different from the others, marked only with a single word: private. Jason hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man who snooped, but the label, it tugged at something, a nerve, a doubt. And with Lily downstairs humming in the kitchen, he reached for the lid and opened it. What he found didn't make sense at first. A tangle of old medical forms, prescriptions, a discharge summary from a hospital he'd never heard of, documents stamped with unfamiliar names, a few photographs, slightly faded, of a younger woman with Lily's eyes, but not quite her face. He flipped through the paperwork slowly, each page revealing more than the last. Letters about hormone therapy, surgical records from 2007, a name he'd never heard her speak aloud. His pulse quickened. His hands shook. He read them again and again, and then he stopped. The attic went silent. The house below suddenly felt miles away. The truth was simple, printed in black and white. His wife had transitioned. Years before she met him, she had been born into a body she didn't recognize and changed it completely. And she never told him. Jason sat back on his heels, documents still in his hands, trying to breathe through the noise now flooding his head. It wasn't just shock, it was disorientation. Grief for something he hadn't even known was missing. That night, he didn't speak at dinner. He didn't say what he had found. He just watched Lily closely, every gesture, every word, trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the version of her he'd just met in old paperwork. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was confusion. A storm with no center. 1,000 questions screaming inside a man who didn't know how to ask even one. The next evening, he finally brought it up. He stood in the doorway, holding the folder. Lily froze. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just looked at her like she had vanished before his eyes. "What is this?" he asked. She took the folder gently, sat down, and tried to explain. Her voice was calm, shaking, honest. She spoke of fear, of survival, of how much she loved him, and how terrified she'd been that he might not love her back if he ever knew. Jason didn't respond. He stood for a long time, silent. Then left the room. And from that moment on, something between them shifted. He couldn't unsee it, couldn't unknow it. The truth sat between them at every meal, laid between them in bed. She tried to hold them together, to remind him that nothing essential had changed. But to Jason, everything had. Not because she wasn't the woman he loved, but because the life he thought he understood. Every kiss, every memory, every vow, now felt like it had been built on sand, and he didn't know if he could stand on it anymore. By June, the house had grown quiet again, but not the peaceful kind. It was the silence of things unraveling. The silence before glass shatters. Lily could feel it. Every step she took was careful, cautious. She moved like someone in a stranger's home, only it was her own. The air was different, the rooms colder. Jason had become a shadow of himself. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse, but the warmth in his eyes had gone out. He came home late, ate in silence, drank more. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with love, it was with distance, and something heavier. Lily tried everything, notes in his lunchbox, dinner waiting on the stove, a hand reaching out across the bed at night. But he stayed on the edge, unreachable. And she was slipping. The conversations they once had were replaced by curt replies and long silences. Sometimes he'd look at her like she was someone who'd died. Other times, like she was a stranger who had moved into his wife's body. She wanted to tell him again, to explain, to beg if she had to. But how do you explain something so sacred to someone who only sees betrayal? On the night of June 6th, Jason came home drunk. Not stumbling, not wild, but full of that quiet, heavy kind of rage that simmers just below the skin. Lily was waiting for him in the living room. She'd lit a candle, made tea. She wanted, for once, to talk, really talk. "I love you," she said softly. "I'm still the same person. I'm still your wife." Jason didn't respond. He dropped his keys on the counter, loosened his boots, and stared at the floor for a long time. She stood and crossed the room. "Please," she whispered, "can we stop pretending we don't love each other?" He looked up at her then, and something cracked. The weight of 3 months of silence, of shame, of not knowing how to explain what he was feeling, exploded. "I don't even know who you are," he said. And Lily, heartbreaking, whispered, "I'm right here." That's when it happened. The moment they'd both feared. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even a choice. It was grief turned violent, confusion turned to rage. A man who felt lost, broken, betrayed, lashing out not at Lily, but at everything he never learned to face. They argued, shouted. She tried to calm him, but her voice was drowned out by years of silence turned into thunder. A plate shattered, a chair overturned, and then he grabbed the knife. In the next moments, everything unraveled. The sounds were muffled. The room spun. The candle flickered. By the time it was over, Lily lay still on the carpet, her blood soaking into the wood grain, her eyes still open. Jason stood over her, shaking. The knife dropped. The house was silent again. Not the kind of silence before something breaks, but the kind that follows something that cannot be undone. He sat on the floor for hours, not crying, not running, just staring. At 9:32 a.m. the next morning, he picked up the phone. "She's gone," he said. "They need to come." The police arrived just after 9:45 a.m. The house was still. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the yard, no broken glass. Just a man sitting on the couch with his head in his hands, silent, hollow, barely breathing, and a woman lying in the living room, her blood soaked into the carpet in a widening halo beneath her. The knife lay just inches from her hand. The scene was quiet, precise, and unmistakably deliberate. At first, Jason said little. He mumbled that he'd come downstairs and found her like that maybe someone had broken in, that he didn't know what happened. But the story, it didn't hold. The timeline was wrong. Neighbors had heard shouting the night before, glass shattering, something heavy falling, and then nothing. A nearby liquor store camera had caught Jason hours earlier, alone, stumbling drunk, slurring at the cashier. Blood spatter analysis told a different story. There had been a struggle. Lily had tried to fight, and under her fingernails, they found the final truth: his skin, his DNA, his rage. When detectives sat him down in the interrogation room, Jason barely made eye contact. He looked lost, like a man still standing in the ruins of a house he burned down and hadn't yet realized he was the one holding the match. They asked why? He couldn't answer. He talked in circles, about confusion, about betrayal, about not knowing how to move forward. But no matter how many words he said, none of them brought Lily back. The trial began months later. By then, the media had picked up the story. Headlines were everywhere. Newlywed discovers wife's secret, ends in tragedy. Trans woman murdered by husband after discovery. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Reporters, activists, families, strangers. People came not just to see justice, but to understand. To ask how something so intimate, so human, had ended in blood. The prosecution built their case methodically. Medical records, photos, testimonies from neighbors, the 911 call, Jason's own words from the interrogation room. They painted a portrait of a man consumed not just by ignorance, but by pride, by the belief that love had to look a certain way, that anything outside it was deception. The defense tried to counter with emotion. They spoke of shock, trauma, a psychological break. Jason even took the stand. He spoke of Lily as if she were someone he still loved. He cried. He said he felt robbed of the truth, that he would have understood, maybe, if only she had told him sooner. But the jury saw what the photos showed. 26 stab wounds, a silent kitchen, a woman who only ever wanted to be loved, and a man who couldn't bear the weight of the truth he never asked for. They deliberated for just over 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty. Second-degree murder. 25 years without parole. Jason barely reacted when they read the sentence. Maybe he knew, somewhere deep down, that this ending had been written the moment he chose silence over understanding. Lily's funeral was held 3 weeks later. It was small, simple, but her name was hers. And the people who came didn't talk about how she died. They talked about how she lived, how she listened, how she made others feel safe, how she wore pain like a dress no one could see, but somehow still managed to smile. The house was sold. The headlines faded. But the questions stayed. Could it have been different? If she had told him sooner? If he had asked with more compassion? If either of them had believed that love, real love, can hold the weight of truth? We'll never know, because in the end, the secret didn't kill her. His fear of it did.